He believed he had mastered every crisis money could solve, every negotiation power could win, and every silence fear could enforce. But nothing in Vincent Romano's carefully controlled world prepared him for the quiet rebellion of a 6-year-old little girl who simply refused to take another bite without the one person everyone else had overlooked. The crystal chandeliers poured warm golden light across the enormous dining hall, reflecting against polished marble floors and the gleaming silver placed with perfect precision beside every porcelain plate. More than 30 distinguished guests filled the long table, their tailored suits and elegant evening gowns creating a picture of effortless wealth, while conversations about investments, charity galas, and political connections drifted softly through the room. At the center of it all sat Vincent Romano, respected by business leaders throughout New York for his discipline, influence, and impossible standards. Even after losing his beloved wife nearly a year earlier, he had never allowed grief to interrupt the rhythm of his responsibilities. Every dinner remained flawless. Every event followed schedule. Every employee knew exactly what excellence looked like. Yet on this evening, perfection came to a complete stop because of one small voice. Lily Romano sat quietly in her chair, her tiny hands resting neatly in her lap as a carefully prepared plate of homemade pasta cooled untouched before her. The private chef had recreated her favorite recipe with painstaking care. Fresh herbs scented the air. Warm bread waited beside her plate. A glass of cold milk stood exactly where she always preferred it. Still, she did not lift her fork. She simply stared toward the large doorway leading into the service hallway. At first, everyone smiled politely. Children could be stubborn. One guest laughed softly and suggested dessert first. Another joked that perhaps the young lady was negotiating like her father. Vincent offered Lily the patient smile he had practiced countless times during the difficult months after Isabella's passing. "Sweetheart," he said gently, "just one bite." Lily slowly shook her head. "Please," he tried. Again, keeping his voice calm enough that none of the guests would sense the growing concern beneath it. Another small shake of her head. The room gradually became quieter. Forks stopped moving. Glasses remained suspended halfway to waiting lips. Even the servers along the walls exchanged uncertain glances without daring to speak. Vincent leaned forward, his expression softening instead of hardening. "Tell me what you want." Lily's blue eyes never moved from the doorway. "Miss Naomi." Several guests frowned, unsure they had heard correctly. A woman seated near the end of the table whispered to her husband, asking who Naomi was. Someone answered quietly that she was only one of the household maids hired several months earlier. "Only a maid." The words floated invisibly through the room, without anyone realizing how heavy they truly were. Vincent hesitated. Naomi should have been finishing cleanup in the kitchen with the evening staff. She was never expected in the formal dining room unless specifically requested for service. Yet Lily repeated herself with complete certainty. "I want Miss Naomi." Her voice remained gentle, never demanding, never loud, yet somehow it carried farther than any speech delivered that evening. Vincent glanced toward the butler, who immediately understood the silent instruction and disappeared into the hallway. An uneasy stillness settled over the room, as if every ticking second stretched longer than the last. Guests shifted awkwardly in their seats, uncertain whether they were witnessing ordinary childhood behavior or something far more meaningful. A minute later, Naomi appeared quietly at the doorway, dressed in her simple housekeeping uniform, her dark skin glowing softly beneath the warm lights, her posture humble but confident, surprised that she had been summoned into the middle of such an important gathering. She lowered her eyes respectfully before looking toward Lily, whose face transformed with the first genuine smile anyone had seen that evening. Without hesitation, the little girl reached both hands toward her and whispered words that left every heart waiting for an explanation. "I knew you'd come. Now I can finally eat." Naomi. Carter had arrived at the Romano estate on a rainy Monday morning almost 8 months earlier, carrying nothing more than a small suitcase, a neatly folded reference letter, and the quiet determination to begin again after years of caring for elderly residents at a retirement home outside Savannah, Georgia. The mansion looked impossibly grand compared to anywhere she had ever worked, with towering stone columns, perfectly trimmed gardens, and windows that reflected the gray sky like polished mirrors. The house manager explained the rules with professional efficiency. Every hallway had a schedule. Every room had a standard. Every employee understood that Mr. Romano valued discipline above everything else. Naomi listened carefully, nodded politely, and memorized every instruction without complaint. During her first week, she rarely caught more than a brief glimpse of Vincent as he left early for meetings or returned long after sunset. He was courteous but distant, carrying himself like a man whose attention was always somewhere beyond the walls of his own home. The staff spoke respectfully about him, but they spoke even more softly whenever Isabella's name surfaced. Her portrait still rested above the grand fireplace, smiling warmly at everyone who entered the house, while fresh white lilies appeared beneath it every Monday without fail. Naomi soon noticed another quiet routine that no one mentioned aloud. Every evening, a dinner tray was prepared for Lily with the same care it always had been, yet most of it returned untouched. Different cooks tried different recipes. A nutrition specialist visited twice each month. A child psychologist suggested games and rewards. Nothing changed. Lily never caused trouble. She never shouted or cried during meals. She simply sat politely, thanked everyone for trying, and ate only enough to satisfy the adults watching her before asking to be excused. One afternoon, Naomi found the little girl sitting alone beside the library window, holding a picture book open without turning a single page. Rain tapped gently against the glass while the enormous room remained wrapped in silence. Naomi did not interrupt her. She quietly dusted the shelves, organized scattered books, and hummed an old lullaby her grandmother used to sing while preparing supper. After several minutes, Lily finally looked up. "My mom used to hum when she cooked," she whispered so softly that the words almost disappeared into the room. Naomi smiled with genuine warmth, but resisted the urge to ask questions. Instead, she simply replied, "She must have made your kitchen feel very happy." Lily looked back at the rain and gave the smallest nod. Before leaving the room, Naomi placed the forgotten picture book neatly beside the child and wished her a peaceful afternoon. The next day, when Naomi entered the breakfast room carrying fresh fruit for the kitchen staff, she found the same little girl already waiting by the doorway. Lily held the picture book tightly against her chest before looking up with cautious hope. "Will you hum that song again sometime?" she asked. Naomi smiled, surprised that the quiet child had remembered something so simple. "If it makes your morning a little brighter," she answered gently, "I would be happy to." For the first time since Naomi had arrived at the Romano estate, Lily smiled without anyone asking her to. From that morning forward, an almost invisible routine began to grow between Naomi and Lily, one so ordinary that most of the household never noticed it, yet powerful enough to slowly change the atmosphere inside the enormous estate. Naomi never tried to entertain the little girl with expensive toys or elaborate surprises. She understood that grief did not disappear because someone demanded happiness. Instead, she offered something much quieter. Every morning, she greeted Lily with the same warm smile, asked how she had slept, and placed a small fresh flower beside her breakfast plate without saying why. Sometimes it was a white daisy from the garden. Sometimes it was a tiny sprig of lavender. Sometimes it was a single rosebud that had not yet fully opened. Lily never questioned the gesture, but she always looked at the flower before looking at her food. One afternoon, after finishing her school lessons, Lily wandered into the conservatory where Naomi was trimming fresh flowers for the dining room. Sunlight poured through the glass ceiling, filling the room with gentle warmth as butterflies drifted among the blooming plants outside. Lily quietly picked up a fallen white blossom and studied it for several seconds. "My mommy loved flowers," she whispered. Naomi carefully set down the scissors and smiled. "Then maybe flowers help us remember people we love without making us feel sad every time." Lily turned the blossom slowly between her fingers. "Can memories stay if people are gone?" Naomi answered after a thoughtful pause. "Love does not leave when someone does. Sometimes it simply finds quieter ways to stay with us." The little girl seemed to carry those words with her throughout the afternoon. During dinner that evening, she ate several more bites than usual before glancing toward the empty chair where her mother had always sat. Instead of looking away as everyone else usually did, Naomi simply acknowledged the chair with a gentle smile before returning to her work. There was no awkward silence and no attempt to distract Lily. Somehow that quiet acceptance made the room feel lighter. Days became weeks, and Lily slowly began seeking Naomi whenever she wanted to read, draw, or simply sit without speaking. They often spent rainy afternoons in the library building tiny bookmarks from pressed flowers collected around the estate. Lily carefully wrote little notes inside each one, although she never showed anyone what they said. One evening, Naomi discovered a finished bookmark resting beneath Isabella's framed photograph in the hallway. Tucked beside the pressed white flower were 5 carefully written words in a child's handwriting. "I still tell you everything, Mommy." Naomi quietly adjusted the frame so the bookmark would not slip away, then walked on without mentioning what she had seen. She believed some moments belonged only to the heart that created them. From the upper landing of the grand staircase, Vincent happened to witness that silent act of kindness. He watched Naomi pause only long enough to protect his daughter's precious keepsake before continuing her work without expecting thanks or recognition. For reasons he could not yet explain, the weight he had carried for so many months seemed just a little lighter as he stood there watching a woman whom almost everyone else still considered only another member of the household staff. As autumn settled over the Romano estate, the trees surrounding the property slowly turned shades of amber and crimson, covering the winding stone paths with leaves that crunched softly beneath every careful step. The mansion remained as elegant and organized as ever, yet something almost impossible to measure had begun to change inside its walls. Laughter, once absent from the grand rooms, occasionally drifted through open doorways before disappearing just as quietly as it had arrived. Lily no longer hurried away after finishing her schoolwork. Instead, she searched for Naomi whenever she had a free afternoon, sometimes helping fold fresh towels, sometimes arranging flowers for the dining room, and sometimes simply sitting nearby while Naomi completed ordinary tasks. They rarely needed long conversations because comfort had gradually replaced silence. One cool Saturday afternoon, Naomi found Lily waiting beside the small wooden table in the sunlit breakfast room with colored paper, ribbon, and dried flower petals spread neatly across the surface. "Can you help me make another bookmark?" Lily asked with hopeful eyes. Naomi smiled and pulled out the chair beside her. Together, they carefully pressed delicate white blossoms between pieces of heavy paper before tying each finished bookmark with pale blue ribbon. Lily concentrated with surprising patience, occasionally smiling whenever one of the flowers settled perfectly into place. After nearly an hour, she quietly separated one bookmark from the others and slipped it into her pocket instead of placing it with the finished collection. Naomi noticed but respected the child's privacy. That evening, while carrying freshly folded linens upstairs, she passed the family sitting room and saw Lily standing alone before Isabella's portrait. The little girl gently removed the bookmark from her pocket and tucked it beside the silver picture frame. Then she whispered something too soft to hear before kissing her fingertips and touching the edge of the frame with quiet affection. Naomi lowered her eyes and continued walking without interrupting the deeply personal moment. She understood that healing never meant forgetting. It meant finding gentle ways to carry love forward. Unbeknownst to both of them, Vincent had returned home earlier than expected after a meeting downtown ended ahead of schedule. From the hallway beyond the partially opened door, he witnessed the entire scene without either of them realizing he was there. He remained completely still as Lily walked away with lighter steps than he had seen in months. Moments later, Naomi entered only long enough to straighten the slightly tilted photograph and carefully adjust the handmade bookmark so it would remain safely in place. She did not seek recognition, nor did she linger. She simply smiled softly at Isabella's photograph before quietly leaving the room. Vincent stood frozen long after the hallway became empty. He had spent months believing that protecting his daughter meant surrounding her with the finest doctors, teachers, and opportunities money could provide. Yet this woman, whose name most of his guests barely remembered, had given Lily something none of those resources could purchase. She had created a space where grief no longer had to be hidden. Later that evening, while reviewing documents in his study, Vincent found himself unable to focus. The image of Naomi gently preserving his daughter's tiny expression of love returned again and again. For the first time since Isabella's passing, he began to wonder whether true strength inside a family was measured not by control or influence, but by the quiet kindness of someone who expected nothing in return. Winter arrived quietly, covering the gardens of the Romano estate with a delicate layer of frost that shimmered beneath the morning sun. Inside the mansion, however, warmth had slowly returned in ways that no fireplace could explain. The household staff noticed that Lily no longer skipped through the hallways with her eyes fixed on the floor. She greeted people by name, thanked the cooks after every meal, and sometimes even carried a small vase of fresh flowers to the breakfast table before anyone else arrived. Vincent noticed every change, although he rarely commented on them. Instead, he began adjusting his schedule so he could occasionally be home before dinner, telling himself it was simply good parenting. Deep down, he suspected another reason. He wanted to understand the quiet influence Naomi seemed to have without ever asking for attention. One crisp Saturday afternoon, he found Lily and Naomi in the greenhouse, surrounded by rows of blooming orchids carefully protected from the cold. Lily held a small watering can with both hands, while Naomi patiently showed her how to water only the roots instead of the blossoms. "Flowers get thirsty too," Lily said with a smile. Naomi laughed softly. "They do, but too much water can make them weaker instead of stronger." Lily frowned thoughtfully before asking, "Do hearts work like flowers?" Naomi paused for a moment, surprised by the question. She knelt beside the little girl, so they were looking at the same white orchid. "Some hearts need sunshine," she answered gently. "Some need time. All of them need kindness." Lily slowly nodded as if she had just learned something far more important than gardening. Standing unnoticed beyond the greenhouse doorway, Vincent listened without interrupting. Those simple words settled into his mind long after the conversation ended. They were not dramatic. They were not rehearsed. They carried the quiet truth of someone who had learned compassion through ordinary life rather than grand speeches. Later that afternoon, Vincent asked the estate manager for Naomi's employment file. He expected to find impressive credentials explaining why she connected so naturally with children, yet the folder contained nothing extraordinary. Years spent caring for elderly residents. Excellent references describing patience, reliability, and quiet professionalism. No special awards. No advanced child psychology training. Nothing that explained why Lily trusted her so completely. As he closed the file, Vincent realized he had been searching for qualifications when the answer had been unfolding before his eyes for months. Naomi never tried to earn Lily's affection. She earned her trust by showing up every single day with the same steady kindness. That evening, before leaving the office inside the mansion, Vincent made one small change. He instructed the estate manager to adjust Naomi's daily schedule so she would always be available during Lily's breakfast and dinner whenever possible. The manager looked slightly surprised but accepted the instruction without question. Vincent offered no further explanation because he was only beginning to understand it himself. Sometimes the strongest foundation inside a family was built not by wealth, authority, or carefully planned routines, but by the quiet presence of someone whose greatest gift was making another person feel safe enough to heal one ordinary day at a time. The following evening, the Romano estate welcomed its most distinguished guests of the season, filling the grand dining hall with respected business leaders, charitable foundation directors, longtime family friends, and community figures who admired Vincent's reputation for excellence as much as his generosity. Crystal glasses reflected the golden light of towering chandeliers, while a string quartet performed softly from the far corner of the room, creating an atmosphere of effortless elegance. Every place setting had been arranged with absolute precision, every floral centerpiece carefully balanced in shades of white and pale green, and every member of the household staff moved with quiet professionalism. To the guests, the evening appeared flawless. Only Vincent noticed the small detail that mattered more than everything else combined. Lily sat calmly beside him, wearing a light blue dress that Isabella had purchased for a special occasion they had never been able to celebrate together. She smiled politely whenever someone greeted her, yet her eyes kept drifting toward the service entrance beyond the dining room. Vincent recognized that look immediately because he had seen it many times before. The first course was served, and the room settled into comfortable conversation. Lily looked down at her plate, but did not touch her fork. Vincent leaned toward her with the gentle patience he had worked so hard to develop. "Sweetheart, everything looks wonderful tonight." Lily nodded without looking up. "Yes, Daddy. Would you like to try your dinner?" She quietly folded her hands together and whispered, "Not yet." Vincent understood before asking another question. Across the table, several guests began noticing that the little girl had not started eating. One woman smiled kindly and suggested that perhaps dessert should come first. Another guest joked that children always preferred making adults worry before finishing their vegetables. Lily remained perfectly polite through every comment, but she never reached for her fork. The conversations around the room gradually faded into curious silence. Finally, Vincent asked the question everyone else was wondering. "Who are you waiting for?" Lily slowly lifted her eyes toward him. "Miss Naomi." Several guests exchanged puzzled glances. A few quietly wondered why a child from such a prominent family would insist on waiting for a member of the housekeeping staff before eating dinner. Vincent did not hesitate. He simply looked toward the butler and gave a small nod. Moments later, Naomi entered the dining room with the same quiet humility she carried every day. She looked surprised to find every pair of eyes focused on her, and for a brief moment, she seemed uncertain whether she had accidentally interrupted something important. Before she could apologize, Lily's entire expression brightened with unmistakable relief. Naomi approached carefully and knelt beside her chair. "Good evening, Miss Lily," she said warmly. "Were you waiting for me?" Lily smiled with complete trust. "I knew you would come." Naomi gently picked up the small fork, cut one careful bite into a child-sized portion, and held it toward the little girl without hurry or pressure. Lily accepted it immediately. Then another bite. Then another. Within minutes, the untouched dinner had begun to disappear, while astonished guests watched in absolute silence. No one understood why the child who had politely refused every encouragement would suddenly eat so happily with nothing more than Naomi sitting beside her. Vincent looked around the room before returning his eyes to his daughter, sensing that the answer everyone sought was about to reveal far more than anyone had expected. The quiet rhythm of silverware slowly returned around the table, yet no one seemed interested in their own meal anymore. Every guest found themselves watching the simple exchange between Naomi and Lily, searching for an explanation that could make sense of what they had just witnessed. There had been no special recipe, no clever distraction, no promise of dessert. The only difference had been the gentle presence of one woman sitting beside a little girl with endless patience. Vincent rested his fork on the table and looked at his daughter with calm curiosity instead of urgency. "Sweetheart," he asked softly, "may I ask you something?" Lily nodded while taking another small bite. "Why do you only want Miss Naomi to help you eat?" The room became perfectly still. Even the musicians quietly lowered their instruments as conversations faded into complete silence. Lily looked first at Naomi, who offered nothing more than an encouraging smile, then turned back toward her father. "Because she never lets me eat alone." Several guests exchanged puzzled expressions, unsure they understood what the child meant. Vincent waited without interrupting. Lily continued in the same gentle voice that somehow carried through the enormous dining hall. "When everybody else wanted me to finish my dinner, they kept telling me I had to be strong. They wanted me to stop thinking about Mommy because they thought it made me sad." She lowered her eyes for a moment before continuing. "Miss Naomi never told me to stop missing her." A quiet breath seemed to pass through the room. Lily carefully folded her napkin before speaking again. "She lets me look at Mommy's chair before every meal. She waits with me until I am ready. She never gets upset when I need another minute." Naomi remained completely silent, her eyes filled only with kindness. Lily smiled at her before looking back toward Vincent. "She tells me love does not leave the table just because someone cannot sit there anymore." Vincent felt his throat tighten as memories of the past months returned with painful clarity. He remembered every rushed dinner, every attempt to encourage Lily to move forward, every well-intentioned effort to protect her from sorrow by gently steering conversations away from Isabella. He had believed he was helping his daughter heal. Instead, he now realized that healing had begun only when someone finally gave Lily permission to remember without feeling guilty. One of the elderly guests quietly removed her glasses to wipe away unexpected tears. Another guest looked down at his untouched plate, suddenly unable to speak. The elegant dining room no longer felt like a place of formal etiquette or social status. It had become something far more human. Lily reached for Naomi's hand with complete trust. "When Miss Naomi feeds me," she whispered, "it feels like Mommy already knows I finished dinner because somebody is sitting with me the way she used to." No one spoke after that. There was nothing anyone could add to the honesty of a child's heart. Vincent slowly looked toward Naomi, whose expression remained humble despite every eye in the room resting upon her. She had never asked for recognition. She had never tried to replace Isabella. She had simply chosen to sit beside a lonely little girl until loneliness no longer had to be carried by one small heart alone. And in that quiet choice, an entire family had begun finding its way back to hope. Long after the final course had been cleared away, many of the guests remained gathered in the drawing room, speaking more quietly than they had all evening. The conversation was no longer about business or charitable projects. It centered on the remarkable bond they had witnessed between Lily and Naomi. Vincent excused himself from the group and asked Naomi if she would join him for a few moments in the library once the evening duties were finished. She arrived several minutes later, still wearing her neatly pressed housekeeping uniform, her hands folded respectfully before her. The library was peaceful, illuminated by the soft glow of table lamps that reflected against shelves lined with generations of books. Snow drifted gently beyond the tall windows, wrapping the estate in complete silence. Vincent stood beside the fireplace for a moment before turning toward her. His voice carried none of the authority that usually accompanied his words. Instead, it held sincere curiosity. "There is something I have wanted to ask you for a long time. How did you help my daughter when so many others could not?" Naomi hesitated, searching for the simplest answer. "I do not believe I healed her, sir." Vincent looked surprised. "Then what did you do?" Naomi smiled gently. "I stopped asking her to hide her sadness." The room grew quiet again. She continued carefully. "Children understand more than adults sometimes realize. They know when people are trying to protect them, but they also know when they are expected to pretend they are all right. Miss Lily loved her mother deeply. She did not need someone to erase those memories. She needed someone willing to sit beside them." Vincent lowered his eyes as every hurried meal and every well-intentioned distraction returned to his memory. Naomi continued with quiet honesty. "Before every breakfast and every dinner, Miss Lily likes to look at the chair where her mother always sat. She never asks anyone else to notice. She simply needs a moment. So I wait with her until she is ready. Some mornings it takes only a few seconds. Some evenings it takes a little longer. There is never a reason to rush love." Vincent listened without interrupting. Naomi spoke with the calm confidence of someone describing ordinary kindness rather than anything extraordinary. "Sometimes we place a fresh white flower near the chair. Sometimes she tells her mother about school before the meal begins. Sometimes she smiles. Sometimes she cries a little. Whatever she feels is welcome. Only after that does she pick up her fork." Vincent closed his eyes briefly as the meaning settled into his heart. He had spent months believing that protecting Isabella's memory required avoiding constant reminders of loss. Naomi had quietly understood the opposite. Love remained strongest when it was remembered with peace instead of fear. "You never tried to take Isabella's place," Vincent said softly. Naomi immediately shook her head. "No one could ever do that. A child only has one mother. My job was never to replace her. It was simply to remind Miss Lily that her mother's love did not disappear just because life changed." For several moments, neither of them spoke. The crackling fire filled the silence with gentle warmth. Finally, Vincent offered a grateful smile unlike any Naomi had ever seen from him. It was not the smile of a successful businessman or a respected leader. It was the quiet smile of a father who had finally understood that the greatest gift anyone had given his daughter was permission to keep loving the person she missed most without ever feeling that she had to let go. Spring arrived with gentle rain that washed the last traces of winter from the Romano estate, filling the gardens with fresh blossoms and new shades of green. Months had passed since the evening that quietly changed everything, and although the mansion still honored Isabella's memory, it no longer carried the heavy silence that had once settled over every hallway. Each morning began with familiar routines that no one had planned, yet everyone cherished. Before breakfast, Lily walked into the dining room carrying a single fresh white flower from the garden. She carefully placed it beside the empty chair where her mother had always sat, smiled softly, and whispered a few private words that belonged only to the two of them. Naomi waited nearby, without speaking, never rushing the moment and never drawing attention to it. When Lily was ready, she climbed into her chair with peaceful confidence and reached for her breakfast without hesitation. The ritual became so natural that every member of the household quietly respected it. No one questioned it. No one interrupted it. It had become part of the family's heartbeat. Vincent often watched from the doorway before joining them at the table. He no longer saw an empty chair that represented only loss. He saw a place that reminded his daughter she could carry love into every new day without leaving the past behind. One Saturday morning, he surprised both Lily and Naomi by carrying his own white flower into the dining room. Without saying a word, he placed it beside Lily's flower before taking his seat. Lily looked at her father with shining eyes before slipping her small hand into his. "Mommy would like that," she whispered. Vincent smiled gently. "I believe she would." Naomi lowered her eyes respectfully, grateful to witness a father and daughter finding comfort together. Weeks later, the estate welcomed guests once again, but this gathering felt different from those before. People noticed the warmth in Lily's smile, the relaxed conversations around the table, and the quiet kindness that flowed naturally between everyone in the room. More than one guest observed the fresh white flower beside the empty chair, but wisely chose not to ask about it. Somehow they understood that certain traditions deserved reverence rather than explanation. During dinner, Lily happily finished every bite while laughing with her father about school, books, and the tiny birds nesting outside her bedroom window. Naomi stood nearby with the household staff, content simply to see the child she loved growing stronger with each passing season. After the meal, Vincent approached her before the guests had completely departed. In front of everyone, he offered not a grand speech or dramatic praise, but something far more meaningful. "Thank you," he said sincerely. "You reminded my daughter how to live with love instead of fear, and you reminded me how to be the father she truly needed." Naomi smiled with quiet humility. "She showed all of us the way, sir. We only walked beside her." Vincent nodded, understanding those words better than anyone else. As evening sunlight settled across the gardens, Lily skipped outside, holding her father's hand, while the soft spring breeze carried the scent of fresh flowers through the open windows. The mansion remained magnificent, but its greatest treasure had never been its wealth or its influence. It was the simple truth that compassion offered without expectation could restore hearts that grief alone could never heal. And on that peaceful day, everyone who entered the Romano home understood what dignity, love, and quiet kindness truly looked like.